Well, first of all, congratulations on your election.
Thank you.
And you're one of 64 new MSPs. So it's now been a month since your election. How are you settling into Parliament?
It's been really lovely. I think having been so often on the other side of the spectrum, and politics is still new to me. I've only been with the Greens now since, I think, August? Right. September 2024.
Right, okay.
So I'm still an academic at heart. I'm still an artist at heart, and I'm still a community person at heart. So it's weird to be on the other side in some ways and to be receiving all the letters that I know I've been on the other side sending, which also means a sense of added responsibility to some degree, in the sense of actually getting back to people in a way that, for instance, I may not have been responded to in the past by my representatives. So it's lovely.
Were you surprised to get elected? Because you were third on the list, so maybe people thought you wouldn't.
Apparently, it seems like in the Greens I was the only one who was surprised that I was elected, because everyone else like we've been telling you this was going to happen. But I was surprised. It's the whole immigrant mindset. You hope for the best, but then you always prepare for the worst. So up until even a week before, I was still applying for grants and fellowships and jobs and of all kinds. Because what happens if you don't get elected? You still have a life to lead. So I was surprised, but then I was also very happy, because it felt, again, it was a journey that began from the first by-election that I did in Fountainbridge, Craiglockhart in Edinburgh, which is around March-ish is when last year is when that began as a conversation. Right. So it felt like two different campaigns that had to lead to this outcome.
Yes.
So it was just a moment of relief in a way that was very difficult to process at some degree. Yeah.
And what were your highlights of your campaign? Why do you think it helped you get elected? What did you do in your campaign that you think maybe had a sort of nerve out there with people, with voters?
I think that's. Really, thank you for asking that to start with, because one of the things I enjoyed the most was bringing in a lot of my folks who were in creative spaces, younger people, students who I know were so often around politics, had very strong opinions on politics, but were never involved in electoral politics. Even I still found that degree of discomfort when it comes to associating with a party or standing for a particular space. So I think both the campaigns that I mentioned brought together a lot of creative young people. Yes. A lot of our fundraisers were creative and led by local working class artists. A lot of our time was spent on the meadows, going and speaking to people on sunny days and saying, hey, would you like a poster? Would you like to chat about things? And it was very different democratic space. Yes. And I think in a space of politics which is so often focused on the negative components of it all and what needs to be addressed and the concerns and issues and the grief that people have in our communities, when creative folks are involved, it takes a different turn. It was more of people highlighting what makes Edinburgh a joyful place to live in, what it looks like on a sunny day, for instance, what it was like for us to live in many of the communities that I'm in on a weekly basis. And I think bringing that to a political space and an electoral political space was probably the biggest, loveliest thing.
So the campaign you ran, I think, was a very positive one.
Yeah.
And then you got a lot of attention when you arrived in Holyrood. And I think even you had to be, from what I read, escorted by security from your office or from the MSP block into the debating chamber when you took your affirmation. And that, as I understand it, followed a lot of abuse. Did you expect to get this attention? Were you shocked?
I mean, in my speech, in my election speech, I think I said I am to many the thing that the hateful despise. So I did expect some degree of vitriol, because it's not new to us; we're used to it. But then not this degree, just because the level of attention, I think, is one that was international, was all at once. And I'm not just saying of the bad things that came my way, but also a lot of really, really lovely news. I have some of the cards put up right there of people writing in, of, again, parents, children, immigrants, because like it or not, there are thousands of us in Scotland who are facing exactly that, and we're expected to keep our heads down and not participate in the spaces that matter to us and be quiet and be good. So I think for someone to be in a position like I was, to finally say, I am happy to be visible and I'm happy to put myself in the political space, meant a lot to some people. So it was thousands of people writing in on a daily basis saying, from all over the world, and particularly from Scotland, saying, I am your constituent / I am someone from this part of the world. Can you help me? Can you tell me how I can get involved in spaces like this? Can you tell me what you had to do to you had to do to acquire this level of visibility, but also be able to continue along the caring, joyous politics, which has become so on brand apparently for me. It was a lot of pressure, just because, especially that combined with the fact that it is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you had media, you had other people, members of parliament, you had MPs, you had people in spaces of significant authority writing to institutions asking for my investigation, deportation and removal. Yes. And while those investigations were quickly and instantly shut down, the fact that there's so much attention on what's already a precarious process means, alongside people telling me, whatever you do, do not resign, do not quit, we need this is important. Yes. Meant it was a very difficult position for that first few days, just for me to say, this is not under my power. I really want to do this job, and I will with all of my heart. But I hope that all of this attention doesn't stop me from doing so, was where I was at.
Yes, just come into that in a bit more detail. I mean, people like Michael Gove said, that the former Conservative minister said that your election was a sign of things going wrong in Scotland, and others made some similar points, and then said that people who are non-citizens, non-UK citizens, should not be elected. What would you say to people like that who made that those claims?
Well, also because I think one of their central claim isn't just that I shouldn't belong in office, but that the people didn't know what they were doing when they were voting for me. And that, I think, is directly contrary to all the comments on public forums, on platforms, the thousands of people who've come out and said, no, I knew exactly who I was voting for, because Q came up to me on the Meadows on a sunny day and gave me a poster. Q hosted this event, and Q's been doing this work for many years in Edinburgh, far before they were a Green even. So those communities are ones that nobody can take away from me, and they are my testament in some ways. So I simply have to ask, for instance, whoever's questioning my ability to serve in office, I serve my constituents, and I have enough of my constituents, again, on a daily basis, writing to me saying, thank you so much, and you must do this. It is important that you do this. And I have to listen to them more than I have to listen to anyone else.
How did it make you feel that, some people were being supportive, clearly, you were obviously pleased about that, but, being escorted by security to the debating chamber, and a lot of the abuse that you got on social media. I mean, did you sort of think, maybe this isn't the right thing, or what did it?
Not for a moment, I think. Again, I didn't ask for security. Yes. I was allocated it by the Parliament's team, because they're the ones looking after security threats. Police complaints have had to be made about threats I've received. They've had to actively, we had to have volunteers step in the first weekend before I was in Parliament, because you don't have parliamentary resources for that first weekend. Yes. When I was receiving, again, the kinds of abuse I was. So. And also my family was here, my sister was here for the kirking, which is another reason why I'm guessing Parliament wanted someone here around after we faced the issues that we did outside Parliament and inside. So I did not feel like this was the wrong thing to be doing. If anything, it further reinforced the fact that I should be doing this, because otherwise, why would I get this much attention?
And did you receive any physical threats?
I mean, yes. I think that's one of the reasons why they had to bring in Parliament. I think there was a point where I couldn't enter and leave the Scottish Parliament building without the threat of being obstructed entry, including at times with the media. And we have ongoing, on complaints and investigations going on along those lines. And it was right outside Parliament. So the Parliament has its cameras, it has its security team. It was all observed and caught. So yes, so it was difficult. We've had to take additional security measures that other MSPs are not taking in order to make sure I can at the very least just enter and leave Parliament, get to my workplace and leave.
Can I ask a little bit more about that? I mean, the people who were obstructing you, were these members of the public?
Firstly, media. We had members of the media actively, to the point where they obstructed the entry of some of my other MSPs and literally pushed them and shoved them. It was all captured on camera. It's all available online and on public forums. And I don't want to name particular media bodies.
But they were trapped.
It was right outside the Parliament. Yes, it was right outside the Parliament building. We had to take the public entrance because we couldn't get to the normal entrance we otherwise take and just get away from things. Holly, Bruce, as being as tiny of an MSP as she is, had to literally fight through a way to get into Parliament multiple times. And it feels worrying, because it's not just me that this threat is extended to. It's to anyone associated with me. It's anyone around me who I signed up for this. They didn't. And I think at the very least, making sure that they're safe has been my priority for the time being. Yeah.
And just to maybe ask another question on this issue about the visa. Are you applying now, or have you applied for another visa that would make you able to stay in Scotland, for the duration of the parliamentary
Yeah, so I've been very honest about this from the get-go. I've applied, as I said, for the graduate visa, and then I have a pathway set that thousands of people across Scotland follow. It's very routine. It's it's a thing that 99.9% or so. Yes, in global talent, and I'm a very qualified academic. I am an award-winning artist. I was funded by the government for my research. So again, when it comes to my qualifications, I'm not facing any doubt along those lines. And again, as I said, it's a thing that thousands of people across Scotland do on a routine basis. It's nothing new. And in some ways, I think it's brought attention to the fact that people in the health and social care sector, there's a Fair Work rally happening by Unison actually outside Parliament tomorrow. I was at a Fair Work conference just before this actually at Riddle's Court, run by some academics from Heriot Watch, as well as the Workers' Observatory. There were councillors present and many others. And it's a very genuine reality that many of us have to face across Scotland. And I think it's brought attention to the fact that this is a part of our everyday life. It's not something exceptional or new, and we are expected to navigate these circumstances as if we're all immigration experts. If anything, I think the amount that media got wrong and clarified itself over the course of the last few weeks about my visa status, these big giant media houses expected to have the resources to have these answers, except it's individuals like me and others who are just all by our lonesome expected to find and navigate a very complex system.
I know you haven't got your visa situation resolved yet, but are you confident that you will be able to stay here?
Absolutely. Again, as I said, it's a very routine process. It's normal and something everybody goes through. I'm not worried at all. I've just been doing the work. It seems everyone else in the media is who are worried about it, seemingly. And
do you think that some of the abuse that you suffered would have not happened had you been a regular, straight, person, I suppose?
I don't quite know, to be very honest. I wish I could give an answer as easy as that. Yeah. Perhaps there is a very strong argument to be made, and enough people have said the same. But I also think that in any moment of reckoning, as it comes, like this one, a moment of change, I'm not the first. I'm not the only first in Parliament. There's been the first East Asian parliamentarian elected. There's been, I'm the first Tamil parliamentarian as well. There's a lot of firsts that are not just limited to me or any of my other Green colleagues. And I think they've lost out on a lot of the attention that they should have gotten because of the amount of attention that came towards me. I think I was just a lightning rod at that point. I think I was just that ideal story that people could hold on and speak to at a time right after elections, an election campaign that I think for the most part was very friendly and very lovely. Except work and friendliness and loveliness does not quite report as well as a person who's trying to, be someone who they're not, which I've never been, and I've always been honest about it.
So you're one of two openly trans MSPs now, the first two, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And do you see that as a milestone for the Parliament?
Well, also I keep there's a line I keep telling my queer communities, and Happy Pride, by the way. It's is that outness is not the same as queerness. But I'm first openly out trans person, non-binary person, along with Iris in our party. But I don't know if I'm the first trans person in Parliament, and I want to keep that in mind. Openly trans person, and I want to keep that in mind just because it feels important. It has been interesting to occupy that specific space, just because it has a lot of representative meaning to the people around us, and representation isn't just about quote affect or something that's aesthetic, but rather something that's directly instrumental. In terms of how, for instance, there's a book somewhere right there that a parent who's an illustrator sent to me as a book that she was, showing her young ones about what it meant to be fully and freely yourself. And I don't just mean from a gender perspective. I just mean in terms of just expressing yourself, in terms of your clothes, in terms of your identities and your speech. And it feels like it offers a new manual of how people can operate in society when people see people in positions of power who belong to the marginalized identities that, again, they've only seen in quiet corners. There is an element of pride in there, and I am definitely proud to occupy that space.
Do you hope that your election, as you and Iris as the first two openly transgender or trans people, will lead to other trans people maybe coming forward and standing in future years?
I really hope so, and if they do, I really hope that now, considering we're in some ways we're test cases, we're breaking uncharted territory, which is a very settler colonialist term that I don't. Anyway, regardless, it is a circumstance where some of the systems and resources that we're developing through the time we're in Parliament now, whether that's with other MSPs, whether that's with community spaces, whether that's with the parliamentary teams, systems just so that human dignity can be respected, I think is something I hope to be able to support anyone else who wants to come forth. There's the council elections coming up, and I've often told people you learn on the job with a lot of this. You learn there is no right way of doing so. You have people who've lived here all of their lives who wouldn't want to run for council because they wouldn't. That's not what their line of work would be. But we know a lot of people who find deep connection to the work that they do in their communities with local associations, with local unions, and especially with trans people. I think because of the added visibility they face in society simply by virtue of their being, they have a glimpse of what it's like to be a politician because you are faced that scrutiny on every single one of your actions as a trans person. You face that physical risk. So which is why when anyone else asks me about the risks that I faced in the first few weeks, particularly when I was elected, I would say that it's not very different from the risks that trans people have to face on a daily basis. So in some ways I feel like trans people are already ready for politics. I just need more of them in there.
Yeah. What about the Parliament's own policies on trans people? I think last year they introduced a policy where a trans person couldn't use toilets in their lived gender. What do you think about that, and do you think that policy should be looked at again?
So, well, we do have gender neutral toilets in the Parliament, which I've been very grateful for. So there are resources that one can use there. But I think when it comes to the idea of trans women, for instance, using women's bathrooms, absolutely they should. And I feel like there is so often a selective magnification of particular voices in that conversation than others, because I've had constituents writing to me on all sides of the opinion. But we also have women, cis women, who have for a very long time said that, no, I'm not in fact threatened by trans women in my toilets, I'm threatened by men and the violence that I face from them. There's been enough men who have been survivors of sexual assault, including friends of mine, who say that in that case, why don't we ban men from men's bathroom spaces? Where do I go then? If the question I think we bring in when it comes to the whole toilet trans people discussion is, if a trans person were to enter the bathrooms that, if they're seemingly prohibited from one and have to go to another, and if they face an act of violence there, who takes responsibility for that? Who looks after them? Who cares for them? And I think the minute we have an answer to that question is the minute I think we can move forward.
Would you like to see the Parliament then review the policy at the moment and change it?
I would like them to review it and have actual consultations about this to start with, because so often, again, we don't speak to people. There are local community groups across the spectrum, and I do believe that bringing folks to a table has value in it, and I think that's where I want to begin.
And well, in terms of there was another Scottish Greens candidate, I think, who's from India, and I think on the northeast list, and she was told she wanted to stand. I think she did stand, and then she was told by her local branch that she couldn't stand, and because she was on a student visa. What do you think of that? Do you think she should have been allowed to stand? She was told she couldn't stand. So
I'm not quite clear about the being told she couldn't stand element of it all, because that's where I believe there is some ambiguity. I'm not as briefed into the specificities of it, but I did know Sai earlier on, and she's wonderful. She's a delight. I do feel deep degree of sadness that we couldn't maybe have gotten the opportunity that she did, but then there are very individual circumstances here. Even me, having been in my PhD, for instance, offers me particular pathways to visa access that other student visas don't quite, like the global talent. So it is a detailed process, and I don't want to comment on the details of it all. All I can say that I was sad. Sai is excellent, and I really want to see her in politics someday. And any talented person being deprived from politics is a sad fact. And I do think that there are resources that from the Parliament side of things even, or from the general public side of things, from council side of things, we can better do to educate people on the fact that people on visas can stand for elections, and we can better educate them on the particular pathways that they can take in order to sustainably contribute to the economy and to our society as we want migrants to do so. And I think the lack of that awareness and the lack of clear systems, both from institutional sides of things as well as from applicants and candidates side of things, is a problem, and that is something we should address. And it's again, as I said, it's all uncharted territory. It feels like a lot of folks are figuring this out as we go on. So as I figure this out and find systems that are sustainable, I hope to be able to share that experience with others coming my way.
So you hope that Sai will be able to stand again?
I really, really hope so. And I will be there to support her. And again, as I said, I'm sure there's details to be worked out there in terms of where and when that's sustainable in terms of being able to fulfill one's parliamentary term. And again, seeing that I'm learning it and I'm building from that base, I would love to share those resources with anyone else who wants to stand.
And Another issue that's come up, well, just been been appointed the culture spokesman spokesperson for the Greens. What plans do you have in this new role then?
Well, so I've been an artist, and I've been in the artistic space for a very long time. I won this prize called the Kavya Prize for writers of Scottish writers, established by the late Leela Soma, who's an excellent writer, and also a Tamil writer actually. Yes. So the roots between Tamil Nadu and Scotland go very long back. So I've usually been in grassroots music spaces where so often we know, anyone who lives in Scotland knows that Scotland's arts and culture comes from its cafes, from its bars, from its local community venues, from places that offer room for free in order for artists to be able to form the culture that makes up what our society is now. But as much as we focus resources on sustaining Creative Scotland, sustaining multi-year funding, sustaining our national galleries and national performance theatres, I think there needs to be an equivalent level of attention on the grassroots music venues, on the spaces that are often left out of the gap. Yes. There are a lot of commercial venues right now who are struggling with the unfair council tax circumstance and business rates, and to a point where they fall within the gaps of not quite qualifying for charities or lottery funding, and not quite being small enough to have exemptions, except despite doing charitable work for a very long time. So one, I'm working with them to try to see if we can find a sustainable exemption or a sustainable alternative. Besides that, the Culture Act and the Culture Bill, the proposed Culture Act, would be exceptional. One that actually legislates culture into our everyday life, into our economies, and actually considers the contributions of our cultural spaces to the economy as a key part of our fair work conditions. So bringing a Culture Act in would be very much one of my priorities. And alongside that, I know there's been conversations around a minimum income guarantee for artists, which has been a part of my campaign as well. And I would be delighted, because the Greens in our manifesto have a universal basic income that we would really like to push for, especially with pilots for care leavers. And then I think pilots for artists would be an exceptional addition there, because there is a myth that when we speak of a minimum income for artists, it is a middle class aspiration, it is a privileged aspiration. But that just shows a lack of awareness about most artists in the country who are very much working class. So I've been working with groups including the Scottish Working Class Artists Network, including Equity, including Basic Income Scotland. I was planning on holding an arts stakeholder meeting at the end of June, which is already in the books. I have a meeting today with the Scottish Music Industries Association, met with the Equal Media, have some and Culture Centre from Engender earlier. So there's a lot of work happening.
When would you like to see that basic income policy brought in for artists in Scotland? You know, it's a commitment for the Scottish government. When would you like to see it brought in? Or presumably
sooner rather than later, absolutely. Just because, as I said, again, I don't think it's a privileged aspiration. It is an industry that, especially in a city like Edinburgh, we have seen how much something like the Fringe contributes to a local economy. Councillor Steve Burgess proposed the idea of a transient visitor levy about 15-ish years ago, Green councillor, and he was basically laughed out of the room by every party, including those who are now our allies. But now it's set to bring in, I think, about £35 million a year, and that will go to spaces like housing, that will go to spaces like sustaining better arts venues, like the Leith Theatre, and I think using that as a good example to bolster our investment into the arts will mean better economic returns. And we've seen in Ireland a €39 return for every euro invested. So I think it's actually one of the most exceptional things we can do for our economy right now is to support artists. And
got a year in mind? I mean, we're in 2026 now. When do you think it should be brought in?
I wish I had a realistic year in mind, just because as it comes to so many other things in Parliament, this becomes less a matter of interest or manifesto, and more becomes a matter of political will / public lobbying in what occupies the most urgent interest in Parliament at any given point. If it were up to me, we'd have this next year. But I know that's not feasible, because we need the consultation periods on a bill, we need to actually take it through the stages. But I would, at least by the end of this session, hope to see something along those lines in the works.
And another thing that's come up, just to mention middle class artists, you were criticised for saying that you were from a poor background when it emerged that you came from quite an affluent background in India. What did you make of that? And I mean, what is the case with your upbringing, I suppose? What's the accurate position?
abject misinformation is the two words I'll give there, because I do not come from an affluent family. I never grew up starving. I never said that. Right. If one media source can give me the actual source for that comment, I'd be very grateful. I never actually said I grew up starving. Yeah. It seems that quote was misattributed from a poetic piece I did in 2017 with a blogger called Mayank Austin Sufi, who's an excellent photographer, works with Arundhati Roy and some other writers. So he did this series called A Self-Written Obituary, where when you're alive, you can write an obituary for yourself. And I wrote it about my gender because it's right around the same time I came out. And I said, so often we're used to defining our gender in opposition. We love because we yearn for love. We are hungry because we're starved. Yes, it's a poetic. So anyone who can take I grew up starving from that is quite ridiculous. And also my mother would kill me. She very much made sure I was never starving, regardless of what circumstances we were in. But I have never been shy about being very clear about the relative privileges as well as the relative deprivations I've come from, as opposed to me studying in private schools. That just shows a general lack of cultural education about what education in India looks like. We don't have public schooling to the extent that many other countries do. Yes. A vast majority of students still do go to private schooling, and that doesn't translate to what we think of when we say private schools here. If anyone were to see pictures of my school or to know what it was like, then they'd have a better context. And even for I think some media houses who reported Q went to a private school that had an annual fee of £600, made most people laugh upon reading that. And I focus where even then the interviewers who read that, who spoke to people about it, anyone they spoke to when they were forced to report this had the loveliest things to say about me. And honestly, some of my friends from high school I'm sure could have had a thing or two to say about me, but they chose to say the nice things, which I'm very happy for. Thank you.
So what is the situation in India? A lot of people, there's not maybe state schooling in the sense that there is here, and as a result, many families do have to pay for their
education. It is just
it's not like private school like we.
No, it's not like the supremely not in the least like the super exclusive private spaces that are the case. I have been very grateful again to have really worked very hard to have education in some of the best universities in the world, which have been in pretty, again, posh spaces. I went to St. Andrews, for heaven's sake. We know its reputation, but I went on to St. Andrews on a full ride scholarship from the UK government, which is public domains. I went to Trinity again on a partial funding level, to which I won further prizes, including for my best dissertation there. And I funded the rest of it through a student loan from back in India and my own savings. Every bit of my education has been something I've worked towards. And I think it is that conundrum where we are supposed to really work and get to the points we are supposed to get to, where anyone knows how expensive visas are for me to even enter this country. It is not possible for me to be sitting here, for any migrant to be sitting here, without having to work to get to that point. And then we are, then we are demonized for getting to that point of finding good education, of finding success. And there's no.
Just to flag, so I've just gone over 1 o'clock. So
okay. Well,
excellent. Yeah.
I mean, have you had to pay a lot of fees for your education in Scotland and in Ireland?
Not in Scotland, just because in Scotland I have had the privilege of funding, and that came in during about the second year-ish of my university. But you know how much international fee status is as opposed to domestic fee status. Yes. For a PhD in St. Andrews, for instance, when I started off, I believe the domestic rate was about £8,000, whereas the international fee status were about £18,800, which is more than all of the years put together for the domestic fee rate. And my UKRI funding was thankfully generous enough, and I was one of the first international students to get that funding in St. Andrews ever, which meant that I was given the full support for the tuition at international rates. I was given a stipend, and it was a job, essentially. It is what it is. Yes. And you teach there. I was working as a warden there, in one of the student accommodations, which is a very difficult job, to be very honest. And I have enough to say about fair work conditions there.
Yes, basically looking after students who
basically everything ranging from making sure they have pastoral support to making sure they can get in late at night as an assistant warden, to make sure that they're fed, to make sure they're connected with families when one can't find them, to make sure that if they're unwell, to the point of giving them emergency medical assistance.
When was that actually?
It was 2021 is when I was working there, when I first started St. Andrews. And it was for the year, yeah. And then I got my funding, at which point my supervisor said, no, absolutely not, we do not need you putting your body through that. If you have support now, you're fine.
And just moving on, wrapping up now,
of course.
Q, what about your priorities for the coming session, and also have you got any plans for a members' bill at all at this point?
Again, I would be delighted either depending on how the stakeholders meeting that I'm hosting at the end of the month goes, because I'll assess their priorities and take it from there. Either when it comes to the minimum income guarantee kind of element of it all, or the Culture Act would be the two elements, the Culture Bill would be the two elements that I would like to bring in by way of a members' bill. And I think that has integrated approaches to it by way of fair work conditions in the gig economy. And I mean including the gig work conditions that a lot of Uber drivers, delivery riders have had to face in this city, which often deeply ties in with the cultural spaces they are involved in. So I truly believe that something like a Culture Act would be exceptional not only for artists, or not only for cultural spaces, but for every other space that percolates from it. So fair work conditions, focusing on that when it comes to my region, when it comes to Edinburgh and the Lothians East, and on a more national scale, focusing on a minimum income guarantee for artists would be exceptional.
And what would the Culture Act involve? Can you spell it a little bit of details about what that would entail?
Absolutely. So at this point, the way it stands is any funding towards cultural spaces is disaggregated, is disjoint. And we have multiple organisations. We have Creative Scotland, we have TRAC, the Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland, as well as other spaces regulating funding for our cultural growth. But what a Culture Act would do is actually legislate culture into our laws to make it a legal necessity for us to look after our cultural spaces in a way that it isn't right now. So just having that in place in law means that these funding bodies, means that lobbying bodies, means that public associations, music associations, individual artists can have better negotiating power with the government to ask for funding, saying this is a legally protected element of our right. And it protects our intangible heritage, which I know TRAX has been doing a lot of work with. Again, we see the erosion of our heritage by way of our castles, by way of our traditional art forms, by way of walking cultures in up north.
All buildings in Glasgow were going to fire.
Yeah, and Gaelic and Scots storytelling, for instance. So a Culture Act would make sure it is a legal requirement for the Scottish Government to look after these cultural spaces as if we would look after communities, because that's what we do with them. And I'm excited.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you.